Have you ever felt like you're always the one holding things together? Yet, no one notices when you're falling apart. You smile, you help, you listen. You say yes, even when your whole body is screaming no. And people love you for it. They call you kind, reliable, the nice one. But deep down, something feels off. You're exhausted. You feel invisible. And you start to wonder, when did being kind turn into being used? When did caring turn into self-betrayal? See, most of us were raised to believe that being nice is the highest virtue. Say please, be polite, put others first. But here's the quiet truth no one tells you. If you're always the one giving, eventually there's nothing left of you. In today's video, we're not going to glorify being nice. We're going to unravel the hidden cost of living your life for everyone else and show you what it really means to reclaim your voice, your space, and your power, not by becoming hard or cruel, but by finally being kind to the one person you've ignored the most, yourself. This isn't about becoming selfish. It's about stopping the cycle that's slowly draining your soul. So if you've ever been told you're too nice, if you've ever felt like people take your kindness for granted, stay with me, because everything changes when you stop apologizing for existing. It doesn't happen all at once. At first, you say yes because you care. You pick up the phone even when you're tired. You stay late to help even though your own work is piling up. You say, sure, no problem, because you don't want to disappoint anyone. But slowly, without noticing, your life stops being about you. And here's the thing. Nobody ever asks you to give everything. They don't have to. You offer it freely. You offer your time. You offer your energy. You offer your silence, even when something inside you is begging to speak. And somewhere along the way, being kind turns into being afraid. Afraid of saying no. Afraid of being misunderstood. Afraid of being called difficult, selfish, cold. And so you become the agreeable one, the easy one, the dependable one. But let me ask you something. Who's being there for you the way you've been there for them? You see, we've been taught a version of kindness that's more about survival than sincerity. It's not kindness rooted in love. It's kindness rooted in fear. The fear that if you stop giving, they'll stop loving. The fear that if you speak up, they'll walk away. And that's the trap. That's the beautiful prison no one warns you about. Because being nice isn't the problem. The problem is the version of niceness that demands you sacrifice your truth, your time, your needs, just to keep the peace. But peace at the cost of your voice isn't peace. It's quiet suffering, it's spiritual erosion. And maybe you're here right now because you feel it too. That quiet exhaustion. That sense that no matter how much you give, it's never enough. That you're loved for what you do, not for who you are. It's time to name it. This is not kind. This is self-abandonment. And the longer you stay in that space, the more your light dims. You begin to lose the sound of your own voice. You forget what you want, what you feel, what you believe, because all your energy has gone into holding up everyone else's world. So, what happens now? What happens when the nice person wakes up and realizes they're the only one left holding the weight? What happens when you finally look in the mirror and say, I can't keep living like this? That moment, that quiet, honest moment, is where your real power begins. Not in being liked, not in being praised, but in finally being seen by yourself. And I know it's scary to even consider pulling back, to risk being misunderstood, to let people feel disappointed. But ask yourself this: is their comfort worth your disappearance? Because there's a life waiting for you on the other side of people-pleasing. A life with space to breathe, to say no, to rest, to be. And it begins the moment you decide to stop performing, stop apologizing, stop proving. The moment you say, I matter too. There's a woman I once knew. Her name was Diane. She was the kind of person who always remembered birthdays, who brought soup to sick neighbors, who stayed late at work, not because she had to, but because someone else needed to go home early. She was kind, no doubt about that. But if you looked close, her eyes always looked tired. Not from lack of sleep, but from a lifetime of carrying what didn't belong to her. She used to laugh softly and say, well, if I don't do it, who will? And over time, that became her silent motto for everything. The broken things at home, the co-workers who crossed boundaries, the family members who took her for granted. She gave, and gave, and gave, gave. But the day came, quiet and unannounced, when she stood in the middle of her kitchen, surrounded by dishes and phone calls and unanswered messages. And she said something out loud she had never dared to before. I'm so tired of being good. That sentence shattered something in her and woke something else up. Because you see, there's a line, a sacred line between genuine kindness and self-erasure. And the moment you cross it too many times, even your soul begins to whisper, you're betraying yourself. It's not that being kind is wrong. Kindness is beautiful. But kindness without boundaries is like pouring water into a cracked cup. You keep pouring thinking you're helping, until one day you realize you're the one left empty, with nothing to hold yourself together. And maybe no one notices at first, because you still show up. You still smile, but inside the resentment grows. And that's when you know it's not love anymore. It's obligation. It's fear. It's a slow erosion of self. The truth is, kindness becomes dangerous when it turns into performance. When you start doing good things not from your heart, but to avoid guilt or silence rejection, or hold together relationships that you've ended long ago. And here's the heartbreak. You can be the kindest person in the room and still feel utterly unseen. Because if you've never shown them your true limits, they've never really known you. The people who love the version of you that never complains, never says no, never asks for help, they don't love the real you. They love the role you play. And the more you play that role, the more you vanish beneath it. So let me ask you something difficult but necessary. When was the last time you disappointed someone, just to stay true to yourself? When was the last time you said, I can't do that, and didn't explain why? When was the last time you let yourself be human, messy, tired, honest? Because self-betrayal doesn't always come with warning signs. Sometimes it looks like nodding along in a conversation you don't agree with. Sometimes it looks like saying, "I'm fine," when you're falling apart. Sometimes it looks like a smile that doesn't reach your eyes anymore. And in those moments, those small, invisible moments, you chip away at the one person who needs your loyalty most, you. But it doesn't have to stay this way. You don't have to keep giving pieces of yourself to earn a seat at the table. You don't have to keep swallowing your truth just to keep someone else comfortable. You don't have to abandon your needs for the illusion of harmony. Because here's what no one told you growing up. Real peace begins when you stop betraying yourself to make other people feel okay. You are allowed to protect your time. You are allowed to say no, even if it disappoints them. You are allowed to want more for your body, your energy, your life. And no, it won't feel easy at first. The guilt might come knocking, but guilt is not always a sign you're doing something wrong. Sometimes it's just proof that you're breaking a pattern that was never fair to begin with. So if you're listening to this, and some part of you is nodding quietly, if your chest feels heavy with all the invisible things you've been carrying, let me tell you what Diane finally learned. Late one rainy night when no one else was around. Being good is not the same as being whole, and you deserve to be whole. Boundaries, a word so simple, yet for many of us it feels foreign, almost like a betrayal, because we were taught early on that a good person is someone who's always available, always willing, always says yes. And so the idea of drawing a line, of saying, this is where I stop, and this is where you can't cross, feels like doing something wrong. But here's the truth. There's nothing more loving than learning where your edge is. I want to tell you something you may not hear often enough. It is not your job to carry everything. And yet, maybe you've been carrying too much for too long. Their guilt, their expectations, their bad days, their mess. And every time you swallowed your own needs just to keep the peace, you told your body, you don't matter. But your body remembers. It remembers every time you skipped rest, every time you said yes when you were breaking inside, every time you were there for them. Yet no one noticed you were drowning. Boundaries are not walls. They are bridges back to yourself. They are what keep your kindness from becoming self-destruction. They are how you love people without losing you. And here's what's wild. The moment you start setting them, you begin to see something you may have never dared to believe. You are allowed to take up space. You are allowed to say, I won't answer calls after 9 p.m. I can't be the one who always fixes this. I love you, but I need time for me right now. And guess what? The people who truly respect you will understand. They might not like it at first. They might be surprised. They might even push back. But that's not a reflection of your worth. That's a reflection of how much they were used to you being too available. Because when you've been overgiving for years, your first boundary might sound like violence to those who've benefited from your silence. But hold that boundary anyway, because the cost of not doing it is too high. Your energy, your clarity, your joy, your identity. And I get it. Sometimes you're not even sure what your boundaries are. Because when your life has revolved around others for so long, your own needs start to feel blurry. But here's a good place to start. Anything that leaves you feeling resentful is a sign Anything that drains your soul while they walk away refreshed is a sign. That ache in your chest when you agree to something you don't want to do, that's your inner self begging you to speak up. And I promise you, when you start to protect your time, your energy, your sacred no, you begin to remember who you are. You begin to reclaim your mornings. You begin to breathe in silence that doesn't demand anything of you. You begin to discover what you want, not what others expect. And you don't need a script. You don't need to justify. You don't need to explain your worth. A simple no is a full sentence, and a boundary is not a rejection of love. It is the invitation to love without harm. Think about it. How many of your relationships exist because you allow your lines to be crossed? How many of your friendships are based on your ability to tolerate discomfort? And now ask this: what would your life look like if you only kept what honored your peace? You don't have to answer today, but let it sink in, because boundaries are not just about protecting yourself from others. They're about protecting your future self from the regret of self-abandonment. They're about building a life where you no longer have to betray yourself just to belong. They're about creating space where your yes actually means something, because you've finally learned how to say no. And no, it won't be easy. You might cry. You might feel guilty. You might feel alone. But then, one quiet morning, you'll wake up and feel light, clear, still, at peace. And that's when you'll know you didn't lose anything. You finally found yourself. For a long time, just the thought of saying no made me anxious. It felt like I was letting someone down, like I was being cold, like I was disappointing the very people I wanted to keep close. I used to think that saying no meant I was rejecting someone's need. But really, I was rejecting my own. See, when you've been the nice one for most of your life, you start to believe that your value lives in your yes. You say yes to favors even when your body says no. You say yes to social plans even when you're too tired to think. You say yes to emotional labor, to one-sided giving, to things that leave you empty, because the guilt of saying no feels heavier than the exhaustion of saying yes. But here's the truth I wish I had learned earlier. Saying no is not a rejection of love. It's an affirmation of self-respect. And no matter what you've been told, you don't owe anyone your constant availability. Not your coworker, not your friend, not your family. Not even the version of yourself who thinks being needed is the same as being loved. You have the right to pause, to rest, to not explain. But I know it's not easy. So let's talk about what happens when you try to say no, and the guilt rises up like a wave. First, understand this: guilt doesn't always mean you've done something wrong. Sometimes it just means you're breaking a pattern that kept you small. That lump in your throat, that knot in your stomach, that fear they'll be upset, those are echoes of an old version of you. The version who thought self-worth was measured by how agreeable you were. But you're not that version anymore. So when the moment comes, when someone asks for something and your whole body hesitates, pause, breathe, and try this instead. Thank you for thinking of me, but I won't be able to. I'm focusing on my priorities right now, so I'll have to say no. That doesn't work for me at the moment, but I hope it goes well. Short, kind, clear. You don't need an excuse. You don't owe a backstory. And if someone makes you feel bad for saying no, that's not your guilt to carry. That's their discomfort with your growth. Because when you stop overgiving, the people who were used to your overextension will start to notice. Some will guilt you. Some will push harder. Some might even call you selfish. Let them, because every time you say no with clarity, you're saying yes to something far more sacred. Your rest, your truth, your healing, your time. Saying no doesn't mean shutting the world out. It means making room for what matters most. And the more you practice, the lighter you'll feel. The more you honor your boundaries, the more your yes becomes real. Not forced, not performative, but rooted in genuine willingness. Imagine a life where your calendar reflects your values, where your evenings belong to your peace, where your relationships are based on presence, not performance. It starts with just one no. Even if your voice shakes, even if your hands tremble, even if they don't understand right away, because you're not here to be understood by everyone. You're here to live in alignment with yourself. And saying no without guilt, without apology, is one of the most loving things you can do for that self. So if you've been waiting for permission, let me give it to you now. You are allowed to say no. You are allowed to take care of you. You are allowed to disappoint others if it means being honest with yourself. You don't need to be nice at the cost of your own peace. You just need to be real. And when you choose real over pleasing, that's when you start to feel free. There's a quiet kind of freedom that comes the moment you stop trying to be liked by everyone. It doesn't announce itself loudly. It just shows up one day in the smallest of ways, when you wear something you love, even if it's not flattering. When you speak your truth, even if it shakes your voice. When you choose rest over responsibility, solitude over noise, yourself over approval. That's the moment you realize you don't have to shrink anymore. You don't have to smooth your edges to make others comfortable. You don't have to pretend to be easygoing when your soul is screaming for space. You don't have to smile just because someone expects it. Because the truth is, the world has enough polite masks. It needs your real face. The one that cries when it's overwhelmed. The one that laughs too loudly at the wrong moments. The one that says, "This is who I am. Take it or leave it." And maybe for years you were taught to be small, to not take up too much space, to be humble, which really meant invisible, to be easy, which really meant silent. But I'm here to tell you, you were never meant to be a shadow. Your story, your pain, your voice, your needs, they are not a burden. They are not too much. They are the most honest parts of you. And when you embrace them, when you stop apologizing for existing as you are, something powerful shifts. You begin to speak without over-explaining. You begin to walk into rooms without scanning for approval. You begin to take up the space that was always yours. And no, not everyone will like it. Some people were only in your life because you made yourself small enough for them to feel big. Some relationships only survived because you kept saying yes when your soul needed no. Let them fall away. Let them go. Because who you are, without the act, without the filter, without the desperate need to be liked, is already enough. And not just enough in the tired cliche sense. Enough as in worthy of rest. Enough as in deserving of love without conditions. Enough as in whole, even when flawed, beautiful, even when healing. Are you climbing? Your real self might be louder than they expected. It might be softer than you used to allow. It might be messier, slower, quieter, more rebellious. But it's you. And you don't owe the world a polished version of your truth. You don't owe your family a version of yourself that pleases their tradition. You don't owe society a performance of success if it leaves you empty inside. You only owe yourself this: to be honest, to be present, to be alive. And that kind of honesty, it ripples. When you begin to live as yourself without apology, you give others permission to do the same. You create a space where no one has to be perfect, where flaws are welcome, where silence is allowed, where boundaries are respected, where truth is safe. That's the power of authenticity. It's not about shouting, "This is me," from the rooftops. It's about whispering it to yourself at night and believing it. So, if you've spent years hiding behind the mask of nice, if you've lost count of the moments you betrayed yourself just to keep the peace, let today be the first day you don't apologize for your truth. Not for your feelings, not for your softness, not for your boundaries, not for your weirdness, not for your rest, not for your needs, not for your needs. Because living without apologies doesn't mean you're rude. It means you're finally home. And there is nothing more powerful than a person who walks through this world as they are, not waiting to be chosen, but already choosing themselves. It's funny how much of our life is shaped by one quiet fear. The fear of not being wanted. You don't talk back when something feels wrong, because what if they walk away? You pretend you're okay, because what if they say you're too much? You agree, you soften, you shrink, because what if your truth makes you unlovable? And so day after day you walk on eggshells in your own life, careful not to be too bold, careful not to be too sad, careful not to be too honest. Because deep down the question always lingers, what if being myself means being alone? But here's the secret no one told you. If love depends on your silence, it was never love to begin with. If connection requires you to perform, it's not real connection. And if people stay only when you abandon yourself, then what exactly are they staying for? You were not born to be liked by everyone. You were born to live fully, breathe deeply, and walk through this world as the soul you were meant to be. And yes, rejection hurts. Yes, it's scary. Yes, it's hard to let go of people who once felt like home. But sometimes the home you've built was constructed from fear, not truth. And the cost of staying in that home is your wholeness. What no one tells you is that rejection is not always a curse. Sometimes it's protection. Sometimes it's a redirection. Sometimes it's the very thing that finally sets you free. Because when someone leaves after you show them your truth, it doesn't mean your truth was wrong. It means they weren't ready for the level of honesty you were finally stepping into. Let them go. Let go of the ones who only clapped when you performed. Let go of the ones who called you difficult when you set a boundary. Let go of the ones who loved the easy version of you, but disappeared when you said, "This is who I really am." Because here's what you gain in return: peace, clarity, real connection. The kind of love that doesn't punish you for being real. And more than anything, you gain yourself. You begin to walk differently. Not because life is easier, but because you're no longer walking with your back bent for approval. You begin to breathe differently. Not because rejection never comes, but because you no longer make it mean you're not enough. You begin to choose differently. Friends, jobs, conversations, you choose things that nourish you. Not things that require you to edit yourself just to belong. So the next time you feel that old fear rising, that urge to over-explain, over-apologize, over-give, pause. Ask yourself, am I afraid of losing them? Or of losing myself again? Because there's only one loss that's truly unbearable. And it's not losing someone else. It's abandoning the person you came here to be. You don't need to earn love by disappearing. You don't need to prove your worth through exhaustion. You don't need to water yourself down to be digestible. You are allowed to be fully here, as you are, unpolished, unapologetic, alive. And the people who are meant for you, they won't ask you to be less. They will look at you exactly as you are and stay. Because you were never too much. You were simply too real for the ones who only knew how to love illusions. So let the fear go and let yourself stay. There's a peace that comes, not when life gets quieter, but when you no longer feel the need to explain your existence. You stop tiptoeing around other people's moods. You stop rearranging yourself to make everyone else feel okay. You stop carrying guilt for things that were never yours to begin with. And in that stillness, you remember something so simple, so powerful. It almost brings you to tears. You are already enough, exactly as you are, without trying, without pleasing, without apologizing. You spent years, maybe decades, measuring your worth by how much you gave, by how easy you were, by how easy you were, by how quiet you kept your pain. But those days are done now. You've lost too much of yourself to keep playing small. And the version of you that's rising now, she doesn't owe anyone an explanation. Not for needing space, not for walking away, not for finally saying, no, not for finally saying, this is me. You don't have to apologize for your personality, for your voice, for your rest, for your dreams, for the boundaries you've built with your own healing hands. You are not selfish for choosing peace. You are not rude for choosing honesty. You are not cold for refusing to carry what broke you. You are powerful because you are finally choosing truth over performance, self-respect over approval, wholeness over harmony. And yes, people might talk. They might whisper that you've changed. Let them, because you have. You've changed into someone who no longer sacrifices themselves to make others feel comfortable. Someone who no longer says yes while quietly dying inside. Someone who doesn't need to be liked to know they are worthy. That is your power now. Not in being nice, but in being real. Not in being agreeable, but in being awake. And the beauty of it all, the more you show up as your full, unfiltered self, the more life begins to meet you there. The more genuine the relationships become, the more energy you reclaim, the more aligned everything feels, because you're no longer living a life that pleases everyone. You're living a life that honors you. So breathe, stand tall, and stop saying sorry for being human. Stop apologizing for needing time. Stop apologizing for walking away from what hurts. Stop apologizing for loving yourself enough to finally say, I'm not here to be everything to everyone. I'm here to be true to myself. And from that truth, you'll begin to build a life that feels like home. No masks. No noise. No noise, no more chasing approval from people who never knew how to see you anyway. Just you, fully here, fully alive, fully enough. Not to become someone new, but to return to who you've always been beneath the fear. Whole, worthy, and never, ever again apologizing for it. If this message touched something inside you, don't rush past it. Stay here. Breathe. Breathe. This isn't just another video. It's a mirror. And maybe, just maybe, it's your moment to stop living for the noise around you and start listening to the voice within you. The one that says, you don't have to keep proving your worth. You're allowed to just be. If you felt seen, if you felt less alone, then pass it on. Because someone else out there is still pretending to be okay. Still smiling while they slowly disappear. And maybe your voice, your truth, is what gives them permission to come back home to themselves too. So if this felt like a beginning, not an end, make space for it. Share it. Reflect on it. And the next time life asks you to choose between pleasing others and honoring your truth, choose you. No apologies. Just presence. Just peace. Just you. Finally and fully you.